The immortal vampire king walks into a human clinic for a routine checkup, only to find his ex-lover is the doctor in charge. In her arms is a little girl with the same golden eyes as his, proof that she's the daughter he never knew existed. Now he must face the past he abandoned, the child he was never meant to have, and a destiny that could unite or destroy both their worlds. If someone told you the Vampire King's life would change because of a normal doctor's appointment, you'd probably laugh. But that's exactly what happened the night he walked into a quiet human clinic, expecting simple answers, and instead came face to face with the one person he had spent years trying to forget. The clinic was almost empty, washed in soft fluorescent light and the faint smell of disinfectant and coffee that had been left too long on a hot plate. Outside, rain slid down the windows in slow silver lines, turning the city into a blur of color. Inside, the waiting room hummed with the low buzz of an old ceiling fan and the rustle of magazines no one really wanted to read. It was close to midnight, the hour when most humans slept and most monsters woke up. But tonight, the only monster in the room sat quietly on a plastic chair, hands folded, trying to look ordinary. His name was Kael, king of the Eastern Coven, ruler of shadows and storms. But in the clinic's cheap overhead lights, he looked more like a model awkwardly trapped in the wrong place. His long white hair fell over the collar of his black shirt, his golden eyes dimmed to a softer amber so they would not frighten the receptionist. Beneath his calm expression, a strange and unfamiliar tightness pulled at his chest. He had faced hunters, rival clans, and centuries of war without flinching, yet the idea of a routine checkup made his shoulders tense in ways no sword ever had. For 1,000 years, Kael had been almost impossible to hurt, but lately something had changed. Sunlight stung more than usual. His strength faltered at odd moments. Once, while standing on his palace balcony, he had placed a hand over his ribs and felt, for the first time in centuries, a faint echo of a heartbeat that should not exist in a body like his. His oldest healer, a vampire even more ancient than him, had stared at him with worried eyes and suggested something Kael never expected to hear. Go to a human doctor. Let their machines listen to what we cannot. He agreed, not just because he was wise enough to know he didn't know everything, but because deep inside, under all the pride, there lived a quiet promise to his people. He had spent centuries changing vampire law, ending hunts for sport, protecting human villages, teaching his coven that strength without mercy was just another form of weakness. If there was something wrong with him, something that could endanger the fragile peace he had built, he needed to know. A king, he believed, should be the first to face the unknown, not the last. Still, hospitals made him uneasy, not because of the blood, but because they reminded him of the one human who had ever truly seen him, and the night he walked away from her. Years ago, he had loved a young medical student with tired eyes and coffee on her breath, a woman who had patched up a wounded stranger in a dark alley and only later learned he was a vampire king. Her name had burned itself into his memory like starlight, Elena. He left her to keep her safe from his world, convincing himself it was kindness. Some nights, kindness felt a lot like cowardice. King Kael, the nurse at the door tried to keep her voice steady, but even behind her glasses, he could see the way her pupils dilated under the faint glamour of his presence. Room 3, please. He rose with quiet grace, murmured a soft thank you, and followed her down the hallway. The lights flickered once, as if unsure how to shine on someone like him. He could hear the small sounds of the building breathing, a printer whirring to life, distant footsteps, the soft beeping of a heart monitor somewhere behind a closed door. Every human heartbeat in the clinic brushed against his senses like raindrops, quick and fragile. Strangely, he felt more protective than hungry. When the nurse opened the door to exam room 3, the smell hit him first. Lavender soap, faint coffee, and the warm electric scent of a human mind thinking too fast. A soft, familiar voice floated through the air, speaking to someone just out of view. "I'll be right back, sweetheart. Stay in the next room and color, okay? No peeking at my patients. Kael froze. For a man who could cross a ballroom in the blink of an eye, half a step suddenly felt impossible. The nurse stepped aside, smiling, and there she was. Elena. Time did something strange then. The buzzing light became a distant hum. The white walls blurred around the edges. All he could see was her. Older now, the lines at the corners of her mouth carved by years of smiling and worrying, hair pulled back in a loose, practical twist. She wore a white coat with a name tag clipped to the pocket, Dr. Elena Maris. Her eyes, those deep, steady eyes he had memorized long ago, widened the moment they met his. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Her stethoscope hung forgotten around her neck, one hand still holding a clipboard, fingers tightening until the paper bent. In that silence he could feel the old wound between them, still raw under the thin scar of time. His choice to disappear without a word, her hurt, his guilt. He lowered his head slightly, an instinctive gesture of respect and apology that no one at court had ever seen from him before. "You look," she swallowed, voice unsteady before she straightened her shoulders and forced herself back into the role of doctor. "Different, Kael. Sit down. Let's check that heart of yours, shall we?" He obeyed, for once feeling less like a king and more like a man standing trial. As she wrapped the cuff around his arm and pressed the cold metal of the stethoscope to his chest, her fingers brushed his skin. The contact sent a shock through him that had nothing to do with supernatural power and everything to do with the memory of a tiny apartment, cheap curtains, and the sound of her laughter in the dark. He wanted to speak, to say he was sorry, to ask if she had been happy, but the words tangled in his throat, heavy with centuries of pride and one deep, human regret. The nurse, sensing the tension but not its history, made an excuse about filing charts and slipped out, leaving them alone in the humming quiet of the exam room. For a while, only the soft whir of the blood pressure pump and the scratching of Elena's pen on paper filled the air. Finally, Kael couldn't hold it in any longer. "I should not have left like that," he said softly. "You deserved better than a ghost." Her hand paused. The pen trembled. She didn't look at him when she answered. "You made your choice, Kael, and I made mine. Humans don't have centuries to wait for apologies." Before he could answer, a small, bright voice rang from the hallway, cutting through the heavy air like sunlight through a crack in a curtain. "Mom, are you done yet? I finished the dragon picture." Elena's spine stiffened. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to him, full of something he couldn't read, fear, determination, and a strange kind of hope all tangled together. "Stay there, honey," she called, but it was too late. The door creaked open, and the little whirlwind of color and curls burst into the room. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, wearing a pink jacket a size too big and clutching a crumpled coloring page in one small hand. Her hair was a cascade of light brown waves, half-tamed by a crooked ponytail. She skidded to a stop when she saw Kael, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise and curiosity. Then she tilted her head, studying him the way only children could, without fear, without filters, as if she were looking straight through all his titles and into the person hiding underneath. "Wow," she whispered. "Your hair is like snow. Are you a prince?" Kael felt something strange twist inside his chest. He almost smiled. "Something like that," he said gently. "And you must be very brave, storming into a room full of monsters and doctors." She giggled at that, then did something he did not expect. She took a small step closer. His senses reached out on instinct, reading the life in her tiny body the way a tracker reads the wind, and what he found made his breath catch. Her heartbeat was strong and quick, but there was an odd echo under it, a second rhythm, faint but unmistakable, like a half-forgotten song trying to remember its own melody. He forced himself to look away from the pulse in her throat and meet her eyes. They were golden. Not just hazel, not just brown catching the light. Golden. The exact same molten amber that stared back at him from every mirror he avoided. Wrapped in a child's wonder, framed by Elena's face, His eyes looked impossibly soft and impossibly wrong where they did not belong. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of reality bending just slightly as an understanding he had never prepared for slammed into him with the weight of a century. Alina watched him, lips pressed tight, hands clenched at her sides, as if bracing for an earthquake she knew was coming. The little girl smiled up at him, completely unaware of the storm she had just unleashed, and in that smile he saw a future that should never have been possible for someone like him. Because the child standing in front of the vampire king, clutching her colored dragon and blinking with his own golden eyes, was clearly, impossibly, undeniably more than just Alina's daughter. She was his. The echo between hearts. No one in that little clinic room moved for several seconds. It was like the world itself had forgotten what to do when a centuries-old impossibility walked in on a Tuesday night and called him Prince. Kael stared at the child's golden eyes, searching for any other explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he was imagining it because he wanted to believe he hadn't thrown everything away years ago. But then she smiled again, and the truth stared back at him with baby teeth and dimples. "Leah," Alina said softly, her voice shaking just enough for him to hear. "Come here, sweetheart." The girl's attention slipped from Kael to her mother, and in that tiny movement he saw Alina's whole soul laid bare. Fear for the child. Fear of him. Love wrapped so tightly around both that it almost hurt to look at her. Leah walked over and pressed against Alina's side, fingers curling in the white coat. Alina rested a hand protectively on her daughter's shoulder, and Kael felt something inside his chest twist and crack in a way no enemy had ever managed. "Leah," Alina continued, forcing a calm smile, "this is an old friend of mine. His name is Kael." Leah glanced back at him, bold and curious. "You don't look old," she said. "You look like the people in the shampoo commercials. Do you use magic shampoo?" The words were simple and ridiculous and perfect. A laugh broke out of Kael before he could stop it, quiet but real. It felt strange in his throat after the heavy silence. "Something like that," he answered, voice gentle. "May I see your dragon?" She held up the paper immediately, proud of the messy streaks of crayon and the way she had made the dragon's scales 3 different shades of green. As she stepped closer, the strange echo in his senses grew stronger. Her small heartbeat like bird wings, but underneath it there was that second rhythm again, slow and old and faint, like his own heartbeat heard through water. He lowered himself onto the little rolling stool, so his eyes were level with hers. For the first time in his long life, he felt clumsy just trying to find the right words. "It is a very brave dragon," he said. "Did you know that?" She lit up. "Mom says he looks too friendly to be scary, but I think he fights bad dreams." "Then he's the best kind of dragon," Kael replied, and meant it. Alina cleared her throat softly, the sound tight. "Leah, honey, can you wait in the playroom again? Take your dragon. I need to talk to Mr. Kael about grown-up stuff." Leah pouted. "Boring stuff." "The worst kind," Alina said, managing a faint smile. The girl studied them for another moment, her eyes sharper than any 5-year-old's had a right to be. "Okay, but don't make Mom sad," she told Kael very seriously. "She cries in the kitchen when she thinks I'm asleep." The words hit him like a blade made of light. He saw Alina's cheeks flush with embarrassed anger, but she didn't deny it. Kael swallowed hard. "I will try not to," he said. "You have my word." That seemed to satisfy Leah. She skipped out of the room, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded far louder than it should have. When her footsteps faded down the hallway, the air between Kael and Alina grew heavy again, thick with everything unsaid. Alina set the clipboard down with careful precision, as if she needed something solid under her hands to keep from shaking. "So," she said quietly, "now you know." He didn't ask, "Is she mine?" The question would have been an insult to the truth standing in front of him. Instead, he asked the one that burned deeper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes flashed. The tired doctor swept away for a moment and replaced by the woman he had once loved in a tiny student apartment, all fire and sharp honesty. "Tell you," she repeated. "How, Kael? Send a letter to your castle in the mountains. Dear Vampire King, surprise, we broke every rule of nature and now there's a child who could start a war. Please advise." He winced because when she said it like that, it sounded exactly as impossible as it had been. Still, his voice came out rough with regret. "You could have called. I would have come." "You already didn't," she said, and those 3 words cut more deeply than any accusation. "You left, Kael. You made the choice for both of us. I had to make the choice for her." He opened his mouth, closed it again. Pride, that old armor he had worn for centuries, felt suddenly heavy and useless. "I left to protect you," he said at last. "My world is not gentle. A human queen is a target, not a partner. I thought distance was mercy." "Mercy for who?" she whispered. "Because it wasn't for me." The silence afterward was full of things he didn't know how to fix. He had faced armies with less fear than he felt in that tiny room, looking at the woman he had hurt by trying to keep her safe. "What is she?" he asked finally. How is she possible?" Elena sank onto the chair opposite him, shoulders dropping as if she carried a weight he could not see. "Half," she said. "Half human, half whatever you are. I don't have the right vocabulary for it, Kael. I only have test results that make no sense and a child who sometimes looks at me like she hears storms that aren't there." He remembered, with a chill, an old prophecy his first mentor had whispered to him centuries ago, back when he still believed fate was something other people had to worry about. If the king's blood ever beats in a child, the old laws will break. Kingdoms will fear what they cannot name. The night itself will have to choose. He had dismissed it as superstition, an old story people told to remind him that kings should not play at being human. Now it felt less like a legend and more like a warning delivered too late. "Elena," he said carefully, "in my world they say a king cannot have children. They say if he does, everything changes. That is what they are really afraid of. Change, not the child." "Well, congratulations," she rasped. "We changed everything." Her fingers twisted together in her lap, knuckles white. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you left. I thought it was stress at first. Exams, night shifts, heartbreak. Then I saw the lines on the test and I didn't believe it. The doctors I worked with started asking questions about her development before she was even born. Her heartbeat on the monitor would speed up when the lights dimmed. She kicked more at night. No one could explain it." He listened in stillness, every detail another stone on the altar of his guilt. "When she was 2, Elena continued, voice barely above a whisper, "she had her first episode. She was playing on the couch. She stopped moving, just stared at the window like she was listening to something outside. I touched her and her skin was cold, Kael, not sick cold. Empty cold, like a room with no one in it. Then she blinked and she was fine, asking for juice. I took her to every specialist I could without raising flags. All her scans looked wrong and perfect at the same time." "Elena," his name on his lips felt like a prayer and an apology together. "You went through that alone." She met his gaze, anger in her eyes, but something softer too, something fragile he didn't dare name. "What choice did I have?" she asked. "If I told your people, they might take her. If I told mine, they'd think I was insane, or worse. So I became a doctor faster than anyone expected. I worked here because the clinic has equipment I can use after hours without too many questions. Every strange reading I blame on a machine error and hope no one looks too closely at the files." She leaned back, exhausted. "Tonight, I brought her with me because she didn't want to stay with the sitter. I thought it would be a quiet shift. Just me, a few patients, and some time to run her tests again." "And instead," Kael said softly, "you got a king in your exam room." "I got her father," she corrected, and there was no title in her voice at all. "Which is worse in some ways." The word father wrapped around his throat like a hand, not choking him, just holding him very still. He had called himself many things over the centuries. Ruler, protector, monster, savior, but never that. "Is she in pain?" he asked. "Sometimes," Alina admitted. "Not always. She says her chest feels fluttery on certain nights, like there are wings beating inside. That's when her temperature drops and her eyes get brighter. I think that's when whatever she got from you is strongest. I was going to run more scans tonight, but then your referral landed on my desk and the universe apparently decided to play a joke." Kael looked down at his own hands, remembering the strange pulse under his ribs when the healer told him to seek human help. "My heart has changed too," he said slowly. "For centuries it was silent. Now something inside it moves. My healer could not explain it. He only knew it started about 5 years ago." Alina's head snapped up. 5 years, Lear is 5. They stared at each other, the invisible threads between events knotting themselves into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. "What if you're connected?" she whispered. "What if whatever is waking up in you is waking up in her too?" A chill slid down his spine, followed by something else, something he was almost afraid to name: hope. Because if they were connected, maybe he could do more than just apologize. Maybe he could actually help. "I will not run again," he said quietly. "Not from you, not from her. Whatever this is, I will stand in front of it this time." Before Alina could answer, Kael's head tilted slightly toward the door. The easy warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp alertness Alina remembered from long ago, from the night he had pulled her out of an alley just before a hunter's bolt found her. "What is it?" she asked, instantly tense. He was already on his feet, senses reaching outward through the walls. There, by the front entrance, the rough scrape of heavy boots, the uneven breathing of people strung tight with purpose, the scent of metal and something bitter like burned herbs. Not clinic staff, not usual patients. And underneath it all, a faint, too familiar trace of old magic trying very hard to smell like nothing at all. "We are not alone," he said. "Someone followed me here or followed you." Alina's face drained of color. "Hunters." "Maybe," he said. "Or something worse, people who know what to look for." As if to answer his words, a loud knock echoed down the hallway, followed by a man's polite but too firm voice at the reception desk. "We're here to speak to the doctor on duty. We have questions about some unusual patient records and about a little girl." Alina's hands flew to her mouth. Kael's fangs pressed against his lips, more in fear than in hunger. In the playroom, Leah laughed at something on the TV, her small voice floating through the thin walls like a reminder of what was at stake. For the first time in centuries, the Vampire King felt his choices narrow into 2 sharp points. He could disappear into the night as he always had, protect his secret throne, and pretend he had never walked into this tiny clinic. Or he could step out into the ugly light of fluorescent bulbs and human suspicion, reveal himself for what he truly was, and risk everything. His crown, his people, the fragile peace, for the sake of one human woman and the golden-eyed child coloring dragons in the next room. He turned to Alina, the storm already gathering behind his eyes. "Stay with her," he said. "No matter what you hear, don't open that door unless it's me." "Kael." But he was already moving toward the hallway, every step silent, every sense sharpened, as the strangers at the front desk spoke his future into being with calm, official voices. "Dr. Maris," one of them called. "We know you're here. We have reason to believe you're hiding something very important." And for the first time, Kael realized that the most dangerous battle of his long life might happen not on a battlefield of stone and blood, but in a fluorescent-lit corridor that still smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Shadows in the hallway. By the time Kael reached the corner of the hallway, he had already slipped the mask of an ordinary man back over his features. His shoulders relaxed, His eyes dimmed to a human shade, his fangs tucked out of sight. Only the tension in his jaw and the quiet fury in his hands betrayed what he really was. He paused just before stepping into view, listening. The receptionist's voice trembled slightly. "I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. If you don't have an emergency." A woman cut in, her tone polite but cold. "We're from the Health Compliance Office. We received a report about irregular lab results and unregistered patients, including a minor. This isn't optional." Health Compliance Office. The name tasted wrong in his ears, too stiff, too official for the strange bitter scent that clung to the group. There was magic wrapped inside those neat syllables, the kind that hid behind paperwork and smiled while it hunted. Kael stepped into the lobby, as if he belonged there. 3 people stood at the desk. 2 men, 1 woman, all wearing dark suits that looked more like uniforms than fashion. They turned toward him in perfect, practiced unison. Their pulses barely fluttered at his sudden appearance. That alone told him they were not simple bureaucrats. Anyone truly human would have jumped. "Good evening," Kael said calmly, as if he really were nothing more than a late-night patient annoyed at the delay. "Is there a problem?" The leader, a man with close-cropped hair and a thin scar at his temple, gave him a quick, assessing look. His eyes lingered on Kael's pale skin, the careful way he held himself, the fact that he did not seem tired despite the late hour. Kael watched the man quietly mark mental boxes, his suspicion sharpening. "Sir, this is official business," the man said. "We're looking for Dr. Alina Maris." "Why?" Kael asked, his voice still mild. The woman beside the scarred man opened a tablet, tapping the screen. "Several anomalous records flagged our system," she said. "Unusual lab values, tests for a child with no clear diagnosis, multiple deleted entries. In some cases, the files show readings that are not medically possible." She lifted her gaze to his, and for just a second, something in her pupils shifted, as if a second color flickered underneath the first. A mage, then, or at least someone with enough training to read more than blood counts from a chart. Kael's hand twitched at his side, aching to reach for a sword he hadn't carried in public for half a century. "Dr. Maris isn't available," he replied. "She's with a patient." "We're aware," the scarred man said. "We saw you enter her room. We'd like to speak with both of you, now." The receptionist glanced nervously between them. Kael could feel her fear spiking, not of him, but of losing her job if things went wrong. He felt a stab of pity. Ordinary people were always the ones trapped in the crossfire between worlds. For a brief moment, the old Kael, the one raised in marble halls and shadowed throne rooms, considered simply knocking them unconscious and vanishing into the night with Alina and Leah. It would be easy. A blur of movement, a gentle twist of power, and the problem would lie sleeping on the lobby floor. But he heard Leah's words in his memory, "Don't make Mom sad." She cries in the kitchen, and realized that disappearing again, even if he took them with him, would only repeat the same pattern. Running had cost him everything once. Doing it again would only teach his daughter that fear, not courage, ruled their lives. He took a breath he didn't technically need, and chose a different path. "You don't want to go down that hallway," he said quietly, letting just the faintest hint of his power slide into his voice. Not enough to control, only to nudge, to suggest. "You're tired. You've done enough for one night. Whatever you think you're looking for isn't here." The youngest of the 3 blinked, his expression going soft and confused. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow," he murmured. The woman frowned at him, clearly resistant but not entirely untouched by the suggestion. Her grip on the tablet loosened. For a moment, it looked like they might actually turn around. The scarred man stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Up close, Kael could see a thin chain around his wrist, hidden beneath his sleeve, a bracelet carved with symbols that made the air around it shimmer uncomfortably. Wards, hunter's tools, protection against glamour. "I'm not tired," the man said, "and I've dealt with your kind before." The lobby went very quiet. Even the vending machine in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Kael's calm face did not change, but inside, something cold and old uncoiled. "My kind," he repeated, softly enough that the receptionist had to strain to hear. The man lifted his wrist just enough for the charm to catch the light. Vampires, half-breeds, things that pretend to be human until someone checks the data twice. Dr. Maris has been hiding something for years. Tonight, we find out what. Behind them, the automatic doors slid open with a hiss as the rain outside grew heavier. Somewhere down the hall, Leah sneezed, a small sound that should have meant nothing, but instead sent a shock of protectiveness straight through Kael's bones. He smiled then, slow and without warmth. "You are in the wrong place," he said, "and you are asking the wrong questions." The woman shifted her weight, clearly uneasy now. "Sir, if you try to interfere with an official—" "This isn't interference," Kael cut in. "This is a warning." He stepped slightly to one side, positioning himself so his body fully blocked the view of the hallway. It was a simple, human gesture, just a man standing in the way. But there was something in the way he did it, in the absolute certainty of his stance, that made the air feel thicker. The scarred man stared at him, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Who are you?" Kael held his gaze, and for just a heartbeat, let the truth show in his eyes. Not the full blaze of the Vampire King. That would have shattered too much at once, but a glimpse. A golden flash deeper than any human shade, a pressure like storm wind before the rain hits, the memory of old forests and night skies and things that walked long before these men's offices ever existed. "My name," he said quietly, "is Kael. That's all you need to know." The man's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket. Kael didn't need to see the weapon to know it was there. His body moved before thought could catch up, centuries of training waking in an instant. He stepped closer, too close for a clean draw, one hand closing around the man's wrist with firm, unbreakable restraint. The man gasped. Not in pain. Kael was careful not to squeeze too hard,